that up too. Perfect. So, all right, I'm still editing that one. All right. Uh-oh, did the chat disappear again? No, it's still there. All right, perfect. Hey, thank you everybody for joining Common Sense Fishing. Sorry about the awkward start there. Just getting a late start. Uh, Trying to get everything set up. I got some jigs here. We're going to talk about jigs, jig trailers, tips and tricks. I got the whiteboard right here. We're going to talk about how to use the jig, where to use the jig, and if you're tournament fishing, how to break down a lake, a spot, and not waste time versus if you're fun fishing. Sometimes just cruising down that cruddy looking shoreline, you can actually find some good fish, believe it or not, on what we like to call Plainsburg. Basically, what looks like horrible water with no structure, with no rocks, with no laydowns, and no obvious reason why there should be fish there. Sometimes there just are. So, pardon me. Also waiting on the wife. She's supposed to bring me a little bit of moon coming. Excited, but yep. So, anyways, today's video we're going to be talking about jigs. We're going to be specifically talking about jigs in the motherlode lakes, McClure, Don Pedro, New Maloney's, and some of the differences between what jigs I throw where and why. Because there's some very specific reasons. We're going to talk about some jig fishing techniques and things. Hey, Mad Bass, what's going on? Nice to see you on. We're going to talk about a couple of jig fishing techniques that are different, let's say. You may know them already, but a lot of people may not. So I'm just trying to share some basic information along with maybe some advanced or moderate stuff. We're going to talk about a couple of different jig, let's say, modifications, all that good stuff tonight. So smash that like, subscribe if you're new here. But we're going to get into it. We're going to talk about jigs. We're going to talk about my last couple of fishing trips out of Lake McClure. We're going to talk about how important the jig was, where the jig really shined. Got a couple brands here. We got the Green Tackle Box and Jig Sucking Lips. As you guys can see, I got one of my PBs, one of my double digits on a Jig Sucking Lips jig. So peanut butter and jelly with a baby D-bomb trailer, to be exact. I got a couple of those to show you guys. I carry bags of jigs, just ready to rock and roll. And those are all Bijan / Yuping Bang, Jig Sucking Lips. You can find them on Facebook. Right there. Apologize for the coughing. Now, folks, we're going to talk about why I use these particular jigs and not, let's say, others mostly, and where I use these at. Hey, Jose, nice to see you on. Where I use these at are primarily Lake McClure, um, Lake Don Pedro at about 75-80% of the water, and New Maloney's about 80% of the water, depending on the water level. Okay, and these are a very special jig. We're going to tell you why. We're going to show you a couple of different trailers and ways that I fished it, and then we're going to also talk about a couple of modifications that you can add to it. Then we're going to talk about a couple of traditional jigs. I got to dig some out the pack here. And we're going to talk about when I use those. And it might be obvious to you guys, but we'll start out with why I use what where. So at McClure, over pretty much 100% of the lake, I will use this jig. Very few places in McClure where I may have to use a different one. Now, what I mean by this jig is I use a jig that, if you notice, what is this jig missing? So here's the jig head. There's the tie, right, to tie on. Skirt, right? We've got a trailer. and a hook, but there's no weed guard. There's nothing. So fish grabs this, they are 100% screwed every time. And I'm going to talk about some of the challenges behind jig fishing and how this all ties together, because this jig has no weed guard and no brush guard. So the second this thing goes over a cable or a branch, it's going to snag every time. But in rocks, it'll fall in there and pull out just fine. This hook will not snag into rocks, and if it does, shaking it, the weight shifting around, pop it out, and you'll be fine. The head usually gets snagged right in the rocks, but that's why you use a football head. So McClure, I use football head. That's number one. Number two, actually the most important thing, no weed guard, no brush guard, no weed guard. Second, I like to use browns and greens with purple flakes. That's one of my favorites. If you see this here, these are some really nice custom colors that Jig Sucking Lips makes. This is a real pretty one. And as you can see, I'll throw Kitech, I'll throw swim bait trailers on there. And I won't swim it like a swim jig. I'll just crawl it and hop it. And it looks like a bait fish that's feeding and digging into the mud. Hey, Ronald Wokemore, Gerbs, what size? I primarily like to use a 1/2 ounce. So that's my go-to. I'll use 3/8 and I'll use a 1/4 ounce. Little bit of a insider tip is I got a video that's going to be coming out soon, and I'm working on editing like 5 videos. So 2 of them are already out for the members. There's going to be 3 more coming, and then they will go public here shortly, and then they'll hit like everybody can watch them. Now, in the one that I'm working on right now, the bass threw up a very specific size and color crawdad. And so I thought that was super important, that some of the biggest fish we were catching, right? We're catching them on jigs, and they're throwing up lots of little baby shad and minnows that are only about like this big. They're throwing up some really tiny bait. But a lot of them we've been seeing, the antenna sticking out of their throat, or even the pinchers a little bit. And so noticed, your pro tip, I guess, right here for McClure, if you're local, the crawdad was a very light green color. So it was a small crawdad about this big, and it was a light green, like an olive green color, and no red or oranges to it. So I pretty much trying to match that general, like a light green. This is kind of a greenish with some purple tints. This isn't exactly it. I was throwing different jigs. I'll show you the one I have on. But if I could pick one, I don't think these are more of my darker jigs because I've been night fishing. But yeah, I would use like a light green, olive green, basically. The bass were just gorging on them, and the fish are shallow. They're in 1 or 2 feet of water, all the way down to 40 to 60. However, there seem to be 2 like bandwidths of fish, basically. Those that are in like the 1 down to about 20. And then you'd have a few hanging in the 25 area here and there. And then you might see some down to 35 to 45, 50 range. And there seem to be 2 groupings of them like that. With the ones deeper usually being the bigger spotted bass, and a couple occasional largemouth, and the really big ones though being up shallow. Basically jig fishing, just nothing but jig fishing. And so that's what they're throwing up at the local lake. So now again, why do I do this? So let's break this down. If you're not from here, if you're fishing a different lake, how can this help you, right? That's mainly what this is about. Well, if your lake has, see, these are 2 different size heads right here. So you got the 1/2 ounce and the 3/8, by the way. So I'll use different ones. But if you're fishing a lake that has a lot of rock, a lot of mud, shale rock, chunk rock, big rock, and there's not a lot of trees, not a lot of grass and vegetation, not a lot of actual physical structure other than big boulders and yeah, bring those in. Excuse me. Oh, man, man. Thank you very much. So, if your lake is bereft of like trees and vegetation, mostly, right? Especially it's just big wood laydowns, and vegetation, then you want to use an open hook because it doesn't matter how aggressive that these fish are, right, or how subtle they are. The second you feel them, you got two different things. What happens if the fish are just coming up and they're just short striking or hitting it and then dropping it, hitting it and then dropping it, right? Then with this open hook, the second they hit it, you set the hook on them because all you have to do is just lift. So you don't have to, like with a traditional jig, you get the thump, you reel down and boom, right? With this, it's open hook. It's like a giant Ned rig. Yes, the hook is thick and it's not a little thin hook. So you got to kind of, so let's say your rod tip's a little high. You know, we all try to do perfect and keep our rod tip low and control it. But when you have lakes that have a lot of drop off, you have to spool a bunch of, it can be tricky. So you'll lift and then you'll kind of lift high and then you'll follow your stuff down. And if it's still sinking, you'll give it some line. And then when it stops, you're good. You can reel it in, right? So if you get caught with your pants down, your pole's a little high, and you get that, don't, instead of dropping and then setting back and whiff, nothing, gone, right? You get that little don't, and you just go like this. So it gets bit, don't, oh, and you just start reeling. You just do a little bit of a lift back, and you're only getting a foot or two hook set. You're not going to get a much of one, but you start reeling really fast and like that. The second you get bit, so and then start reeling, and then you can reel yourself back into a comfortable position, right? So it's also really important to use a high speed reel when, because the jig is really heavy, and when that hook gets to that fish and this thing starts thrashing around and pulled, it can pull itself right out. So you want to make sure you have a high speed reel tension on that thing, so when the fish jumps, they can't toss this head around. That line needs to be nice and tight. So a high speed reel also allows you, like I said, if you're in a kind of tricky position and you get bit, how many fishermen who've thrown any kind of lure, even if it's a crankbait, if it's top water, if it's any kind of lure, and you get bit when your rod tip is really high or in an awkward position, and then what do we have to do? We have to reset and reel really fast and then set the hook, right? So first of all, you want a high speed reel so that you don't have to be like, oh, you know, you can just and you're there, right? First of all. Second of all, if you got the high speed reel and it can put a lot of tension and it can bring this in fast, then instead of needing to drop and then deliver a powerful hook set and reel, or do the same thing, right? Reel as your hook setting, you can literally, like I said, get caught with your pants down, have your pole up high, and then it's not like you can do a super hook set like this, right? And even if you did that, whatever, we've all been there where we lurch backward and we're real high. Well, if you do hook that fish, a lot of them get off because you can't catch up to them when you've got it. You can't stay fighting the fish like this. You'll fall out though, you'll break your back, right? Some of us are getting old. So you can't fight a fish like that, right? And so how many of us been in an awkward position, the fish bites and you're like, Arr! So what can happen is, and give you a couple examples. If you're holding the rod, we're going to show you guys actually. So, and then that's actually a big rod. Let's use a short one. It'd be easier to show. I apologize for the technical difficulties. These are the 4 rods I had with me out at McClure. A Nico, a drop shot, a spinner bait, and a jig. And what the hell? Oh, I see what I did. I had that on the wrong pole. So one thing is never store your hooks in your eye, right? Because you could hurt it. So what I'll do here, a little trick, show you guys another little trick here, is never take your hooks and store them inside of any of your eyes, right? Because that's how you snap your line when you cast. However, you have that gap between your eye here and the rod, so you can put your hook in right here, see? So what I'm doing is my hook is not going inside like this. This is a big no-no, right? You never want to store your hook inside your eye guide, right? So what you can do is put it behind it like that. And let's see if you guys can see that. So you put it behind it. So it's back here and it can't possibly mess the inside of it up. So anyways, let's put this back. So let's pretend I'm using that rod, I'm using that reel. For one, that's a 7'6". So even if I only get a few feet, the angle gets bigger the further out you go, right? So if you look at something that appears to have a tight angle, great. But if you go for miles, the angle eventually separates. So the longer the pole, the more leverage you get on a hook set. So let's say we all try to fish down, right? But let's say you get bit and you're right about here and you don't have a ton of leverage. So that's also why it's so important to use this open hook so that there's no resistance to that hook digging into the fish's face. Now, second, we all heard of a trunk twister, right? You guys ever done that? Be careful, don't hurt yourself here. But what you can do is you can also twist and get a ton of hook set power out of it if you're not in a good position. So you can kind of lift. This lifting gets you, let's say, a foot or two, but if you do it with a twist, this gets you 3 or 4 feet. Now, if you're hooked, you're in an awkward position, but if you have a high-speed reel, reset and you're back to normal. So it's not ideal. That is not how you want to fish, but how many of us have been do, and then when a rod tip goes up, that's when you get bit, right? And then if you drop and set, whiff and a miss happens all the time. That's why, for one, this open hook is so great. And let's say the person, you take a kid fishing, you take a friend fishing, and they're like decent at it, but they're not good with jigs. If you're not good with jigs, this is the perfect lure to start with, because when you do get bit, you can get hooked simply by the fish just getting hooked by the stupid hook. Like, you don't even have to do much a lot of the time because it's an open hook lure. There's not this thick band of wire, right? Like a weed guard or a brush guard that you have to really drive that hook home. So now, flip side, if you're fishing New Maloney, so you're fishing Don Pedro, you're fishing Big Creek, or you're fishing somewhere where there's a lot of wood, and you're fishing New Maloney's and the water level's super low and there's just wood everywhere. Like the entire lake is full of wood. There's barely any part of that lake that when it gets super low doesn't have wood. There's some in the south, but it's just like the wood is everywhere. They didn't clear cut before they made that lake. Only a certain part. When it's real down here, that lake's full of wood. So if you're going to throw a jig there, you better use one with a brush, brush with a weed guard, with a brush guard, weed guard, so that you don't get snagged. That way you can pull into trees, wood, and crawl it over, right? So it's imperative to use the right jig at the right spot. So if you're fishing in areas that don't have that snaggable structure, and when I mean snaggable structure, we can all get snagged in rocks, regardless of if you have a weed guard or not. However, if you're throwing an open hook lure and a ton of grass and weeds, you're probably going to collect more than if you had a guard, right? And another thing is, we'll open this and we'll show you this. We'll give you guys this tip too, because it's not that time of year necessarily. However, some lakes, what can happen in the fall turnover is, or the fall to winter transition, is when the grass, let's say lakes have vegetation and grass, right? So like ponds, shallow lakes. Well, when that shallow grass dies, that won't die right away usually. And some of those lakes will keep that grass in that 20 to 30 foot range. It won't die, it'll stay there. So it'll still be there. So this is the kind of head you want to be throwing when you're throwing through vegetation, right? When you're throwing through grass and you're throwing through vegetation, you want a hook head like this, or a weight head like this, that is basically something that will part or go through the grass and weeds easier. See this round head? This round head, this is for rocks, dirt, and stuff like that. This type of head will be much better in wood and in grass, especially the way the line tie is. This will smoothly pull over logs, and this will more smoothly go through. But see, it doesn't have a, sorry, I thought I had brought the one out that has a guard. This one doesn't have a guard. So this would be more of a swim jig. But if it had a guard, this is the one I would throw in wood. I have an identical one that has a guard. So I grabbed the wrong one. My apologies. But you want to use the one that has a guard for whenever you're fishing in wood. Now, a couple of things about the trailers here. Let's pull out some different trailers. Show you guys some of the different weird stuff that I'll throw on a jig. And you can see that one of the common lures I'll have on most of my jigs is going to be a D-bomb, a missile D-bomb. So those are around here somewhere, I believe. Yeah. So these guys right here are just, these guys are just wicked for jig trailers. Breakdown Pedro. Sam, where are the videos? Can you do a jig video at Pedro? What should we be targeting? Sure, I can break down Pedro for you guys right now. So it'd be the same thing, in my opinion. I haven't been at Pedro, but for a couple of trips now. But it'd be real similar, in my opinion, to McClure on where and how you're going to basically fish it, because the two lakes are similar in elevation and similar in style. Sometimes one lake turns on before and after another, and they may be on different patterns, but they're very similar, and they'll usually follow each other pretty closely in that aspect. So if the fish are 40 to 50 feet deep in one lake, they're usually there in another lake. Some separate differences between Don Pedro, though, is it has more goby in it than Lake McClure has, because goby like a softer bottom. So New Maloney's, Don Pedro have more goby, or what are also called sculpin, right? So those Ned rigs, sculpin, that greenish brown color, kills it at Don Pedro first off. Not as much at McClure. McClure, there's more shad. It's the more shad oriented. Like there's a lot of crawdads, crawfish, whatever you want to call them. So McClure, trout eaters, you know, there's so much trout in McClure. The largemouth there are getting harder and harder and harder to catch, even the dudes that throw swim baits, because there's just so much of them perfect 8 to 12 inch trout in there. Those bass can get really keyed up where they sit under houseboats over 300 feet of water, or they do some crazy behavior that just make it insanely hard for anglers to target them. And they're so dialed in on the natural bait there that they're very hard to trick and to get to bite regular stuff now. So it's a bit of a trade-off. And then there's so much damn spotted bass in McClure that it's like gone downhill a lot over the years. But anyways, so if you guys want to hear, we'll break down Pedro real quick. What area would I go to? Boneyard or Nudist Colony? So first of all, let me explain that the pattern real quick. So the pattern for me has been jigs, slow dragged not hopping and popping too much. Sometimes if you notice, if you got like live scope, and the fish is looking at it interested, followed it for a while, and they're just not committed, and you can do a slight hop or pop, and then if that might get them to actually commit. But it's been much more of a slow drag with maybe an occasional pop or hop here and there. um, and half ounce has been the go-to, greens and browns, and specifically on structure. So to a shoreline and you see that there's like rock everywhere, but there's big chunks here, big chunks there, then those are going to be where the most of the fish are at in that big chunk rock. If it's all big chunk rock, look for the biggest of the chunk rock, or where does the big chunk rock start, and then where does it stop when you go from like sandy or shale rock to now some chunk, but then it's a big section of chunk fish, all that chunk, they're sitting in there. And then also fish where it meets the transitions and any shelves. When you look up and you notice there's like rocks kind of sticking out at an odd angle and they're traveling down into the water, well, that's going to continue down and they'll sit down on those. So it's really obvious in a way if you think about it where the fish are going to be. They're held really tight to big rock and medium rock and any trees, lay downs, and any basically big rock and any drop offs and like stuff that they can tuck up against to or just sit up against. Anything that's structure. McClure's got a ton of shoreline that's plain and it's got these nice boulders and rocks. Don Pedro is very similar, right? So if I was fishing Don Pedro, one of my favorite areas of Don Pedro, I've got two or three. They're going to be, I've got a lot of them, but I would say, because I didn't pre-fish. So if I was to go out and just pre-fish or to do my tournament would be my milk run, which would consist of South Lake down by Blue Oaks, the dam. There's a big ass point on the dam that I just always tear them up on. There's a couple rock walls down there by the little marina that has all the houseboats tied up to it in that little cove right there by Fleming Meadows. There's a big rock wall right there. It's notorious for holding some good fish. There's a couple across the way in Mexican Gulch area, in Blue Oaks area, some nice rock piles, sometimes some islands. There's some points that drop down with some big ass rock. Got a double digit over there. Um, there's a bunch of spots to fish in South Lake where I don't even have to leave past Fleming Meadows, believe it or not. But then if I'm running, I might go check in where the old Solemn course is, where there used to be a mine. We call it Mine Shaft that blew up. There's a lot of trees in there, a lot of rock. If the bait fish gets pushed in there, there's monsters that'll sit in there. Depends on lake level. I don't know if they'll be in there right now. I don't know about Rogers Creek. I might check in on it because it's a perfect place to throw a jig if it's got a muddy bottom and there's a good crawfish there. You might have some bass that are feeding on the crawfish. They're coming out and doing their thing. But I would probably go into Big Creek towards the back where the split's at and fishing that wood. Make sure you're throwing jigs to have a brush, a weed guard, and maybe even a lighter weight, because when this heavy weight falls and then when the heavy weight pulls, it can get stuck into the trees a lot more. When you have a lighter weight, it takes longer for it to fall, but you can also guide it down. And then when you feel things, you can stop, you can control it a little better. So there's some pros and cons, but anyways, Big Creek, I would be fishing rock, right? So the entrance into 49er Bay, in Big Creek on the right there, where that big main lake point, where it's almost like all volcanic rock and it wraps around. I'd go be tearing the hell out of that. I would be fishing all that point that wraps around. I could show you on the map if you want. Want to go try Pedro Friday? Do you fish the jig inside out or traditional? Hey, DH and Ray, and when you mean the jig inside out, um, I don't know what you're talking about. Like I just fish it my way, I guess. I basically drag a jig, you know, and sometimes I'll hop it. It depends on the time of year and the fish's behavior. How I tie the line. Some guys have line ties on the front, some are on the top. So you get on the bank to throw it. Oh, well, here's the deal about that. I'm going to show you guys how that can be tricky and what you got to watch out for. I prefer to use a lighter weight when I'm on the bank and I'm fishing out and bringing up because of the way that it can get snagged a lot easier. Physics is actually working against you when you're on the shore. I can do a really easy example of that right now, actually. So when I fish on shore, now this is one of the best ways to catch fish. So for you guys in the boat, if you guys can master this, believe it or not, it is one of the most successful ways I've ever found to bottom bounce during a finesse or tough time. And it is the way that I've found to catch the most and the biggest fish almost any given time, unless the fish are extremely active. So if the fish are extremely active, right? Let me put this over here. Sorry. So, and I could actually draw Don Pedro for you guys too, if you want. But if the fish are extremely active, you can just hop and bounce your way down and wherever they're at, right? If it's finesse, you're gonna have to drag it, maybe hop it a little, dead stick it a little, drag it, right? So right now the bite has been a slow drag bite. It's been a finesse bite. Now some of the bites, it's about a 50-50. Some of the bites are kind of hard and fast. Some of them are just load up like weight. And then you're like, huh? And then if you wait long enough, you'll feel a, or boom. And then when you set, a lot of the times it's too late. So you got to be. It's called a pressure bite. So what I'm doing right now is I'm throwing up shallow, right, and I'm dragging it. Now here's the thing: is when I say drag or slow, you have to go slow. Because when you think you're going slow and you're dragging your along, but you're kind of dragging it faster than you realize. Once it gets over like a cliff right here, instead of just falling straight down, it kind of sails out into the water a little, right? It's like, think about when you see movies, or if you've seen like the guys land, and when they jump, they kind of float for a little while, and then gravity brings them down, and then they jump and they float for a while. That's how our lures move underwater. So if you even hop it at all, you can create this effect where your lure goes sailing, and then you boink it, and then you hop it, and then you drag it, and then you hop it, and then you drag it, and hop it, and then you get a big old drop off. And you know what'll usually happen right here is you'll think that you're on the bottom right here, so you'll not be sure because your line will keep going, and you're like, what the hell? So you'll check, and you might reel it up to where it's tension, and then when you realize it's just kind of swinging in open water, you'll be like, uh-oh, and you'll let out more line. So it'll drop right there, right? And then you'll realize, okay, it's on the bottom, and then you'll hop it, and then reel it back up, right? And you missed all the fish that are in this area that might have been in here, any fish suspended or in here. You missed all of that, right? So you only covered right here, right here, right here. See, do you see what I'm saying? So out of a piece of property, let's say this long, you got to take care of this part, this part, this part, this part, and this part. Look at all that if you're hopping and moving it along too much, right? So wouldn't it be and cover the entire length if you can? That's why when I say fish slow, it's a lot slower than most people realize, right? It's also, that's why I kind of fish with my rod tip a little high. I'm going to show you guys right now. It's technically not the right way to fish, But I think a lot of bass fishermen, especially pros from the East Coast and other places, are used to fishing in water where they're fishing in 0 to 20, 25 feet max. These guys, I don't think a lot of them fish in 50 to 70 feet of water much, or 30, 40 feet, right? Or at least not a lot. And so drag a bait, it's really easy to drag a bait when you have a big shallow and you have a rock here and there and shallow and you're dragging a bait. It's so easy to maintain contact, and if you leave the bottom, it's not for long. When you leave the bottom here, you get these big sailing jumps, right? So in our mother lode lakes here, McClure, Don Pedro, New Maloney's, it's super important that you cast, let it sink until it's for sure on the bottom, and you have this slow dragging action, right? And you watch your line and you use your pole. And then once you dragged it like a certain amount, like this, and then you drop your pole back always a little bit every once in a while to check and to make sure, because if the line keeps going down, you got to let out line, right? So once it starts to fall off, you have to immediately lower your rod tip to give that some slack so that it's not falling like a pendulum, and then it'll fall down real slow, tumble down here, and then right you drag, and then it'll fall down in here, and then what'll happen here, you'll most likely almost get snagged because now you're going uphill. This is what you were talking about, fishing from shore, fishing it backwards, right? So now you gotta almost, you hit your and you gotta pop it and then kind of pull it, right? And then, so real painstakingly slow, and you can fish all of this. So no matter where there's a fish at until you get down here by the boat, then you can pull it back in. Now that's if you're trying to find fish or you're on a pattern, or trying to find a pattern. Once you know what depth they're in, then work it from, let's say, 1 foot of water to 20 feet of water, maybe 25 max, right? So you're going to work your lure real thorough, and then when you hit your mark, you're bringing it in. And you're not wasting time fishing down in 40 to 60, 30, 60. You're just targeting this over and over again, right? That's how you fish efficiently. And when you're trying to put together a pattern, you can start up there and bring it down. Now, to give you guys and gals the scoop on what's been going on right now at the mother lode lakes, or at least at McClure, the damn fish are everywhere. They're here in 2 or 3 feet, and 10, 20, down in 30 or 40. Pick your poison. It's kind of frustrating because some of the big ones have been deep. The spotted bass, most of the big ones have been deep, but the largemouth have been mostly shallow. Some of them have been deep too. We had a 4-pounder plus or so largemouth come out of 35, 40 feet deep, got off right at the boat. You guys will see that. Jay lost that one, poor guy. Now, let's just say you're the dude fishing on shore. So he brought up a good point, right? Or let's say you're on a boat, right? And you're in just a couple feet of water, talons. So, like what Tom Smith said, doesn't Pedro has a lot of big largemouth? Yes, it does. And so you're going to want to stay in the 35 feet and up range. There are some big largemouth that'll sometimes hang deeper than that, but majority of the time they're like 25 feet and shallower. So if you're trying to target the bigger fish, stay shallow. If you're trying to put a limit and you're going after spotted bass, they'll be all over. So they'll be shallow and they'll be deep too. But fish are all over. So if you're on the bank or you pull your boat up shallow, you cast out into whatever depth you want and you let it sink. Here's what happens. Let's look at this angle right here. So let's say your pole's up a little high and your lure lands, let's say it lands out here, right here. So it lands here, the very tip. And let's call this 50 feet. So you're in 50 feet of water. Hell, you could be down here, and let's call this 65 feet. And if we did that, let's trace your angle of your line. Do you see anything right here? Right? So you cast out, all right, and you let it go. And then you go to hop, your line is scraping and that sometimes. If you're, especially if the shore you're fishing is steep, right? When you bring your lure up, you're rubbing, or it has lots of, boulders and things, you're going to most likely be rubbing your line across the tops of those. Now, when you bring your lure up besides the point, so besides this, here's another thing. Now, this is in the positive, but it can also be in the negative. It depends on if you know how to fish this way. It's real tricky. So you have your lure is, let's say, now coming this way. And you got to remember the line is always pointed this way. So your lure gets here and you go to pull it up, but let's just say right here the rock sticks out a little. So you bring it in, your line is going now against the rock, but as you pull it, you put boom and it goes up and then it kind of drops down. Boom, and you can almost pull it in tighter and you're sitting there snagged, right? And you're shaking and busting and shaking and busting, and the lure's moving around, and they're ding, 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 ding. But you can't over this, right? Let's say you magically do, poof, whew, thank God, you probably got some fray. Now you're hopping it along and dragging it, hopping it and dragging it, and oops, same thing. Boom, damn it. Now you pull, which way, right? Look at the way you'd be pulling, right? So you're pulling and you're pulling into a friggin' mountain. So how do you get the lure to go up this way? It wants to go this way, right? And what's right here? Friggin' rock. So how you get the lure to go up the rock, right? Especially if there's any cracks or crevices, it can be real tricky. Give it a little pop and a hit and like a little shake. Yourself crawl up that rock. If you're real attentive, you got decent line, got a good rod, sensitive, good stuff, fluorocarbon or braid, you're gonna feel that as you go over it, and then you'll feel it kind of fall free, and then you can start working it again, and the same thing. But when you work this way backwards, you will maintain contact with the bottom like 90+% of the time. And if you want to get bit when it's wintertime, finesse, tough, or even like right now in the transition and the fish, or let's say they're eating crawdads, or those fish are on the bottom and they're not suspended up a little bit, a foot or two, then if you do bigger hops, you might get their attention to look down, come down, check you out, and bite you, right? So, but when the fish are a few feet off the bottom, might not be the ticket, but when they're closer to the bottom or smack dab onto the bottom, you're pulling your lure literally through those fish, right? You're going to get bit a lot more fishing this way. So you take your boat and you do that. It's really magical. You'll actually outfish a lot of people. It's tricky, it's tough. You'll get bit more, but you'll also think you're getting bit when you're getting snagged. Then you're thinking that you're snagged when you've really got a fish. It's quite frustrating and a hard technique to master. But when you're a shore fisherman and you fish from shore most of your life, this is actually what we've done most of our life, right? But when you've had a boat, then you're used to being able to get over your stuff, to work it out. You're used to being able to do something. When you're on the shore, you got to try every stupid little trick in the book and pulling your line out and snapping it and snapping and doing and letting a bunch of line out and walking this way or that way and then retrying from a different angle. We've done it all, right? So those of you who've been a shore fisherman for a long time, you know the struggles of bringing a lure uphill. Now, the heavier the lure, the more you maintain contact with the bottom, the more likely you are to get snagged bringing it up. So a lighter lure allows it to kind of just float off the bottom, and it's easier to pop it when you feel it hit these obstacles. Give it a little slack so that the thing hits into a crack and it goes dink. And then instead of just pulling on it, you let it kind of hit, fall, and then pop it up. And then it comes past it, right? So, and also over the years of fishing, if you're new at it, it might take a while, but there's a genuine feel to when you pull into wood or when you pull into rock or when you're over or going over a cable that you think you might have cast over. You see one coming down, you're not sure, but and then you pull your lure and you feel certain things. You can tell if when you're going through grass, vegetation, it all has a certain feel to it. And the more you fish each given lure, the more you're going to know how that lure feels going through those materials, right? But that's also like why if you're fishing in grass, right, you need to have a weed guard, but you need a jig head that is triangular, that can part, that can go right through that. Also, when you're fishing in wood, it helps to have the tie like that on the front so that the line, when the lure comes in, it can bump and pull right over. When you have stuff like this and the lure and the line ties right here, you can have it easily pull into and get stuck like this and just literally be like that, or easy to just simply wrap around. And then this head doesn't exactly go through weeds really well. It can collect all around this football head. Well, this they just seem to fall off of a more of a swim head style. So there's actually jigs that are made for use in the weeds, right, in vegetation. But you can, like I said, you get a feel for how all this stuff feels on your rod tip. Basically, the sensitivity of it doesn't feel this way or that way. And right now, the bite has been a pressure bite, meaning that your lure feels a certain way, and when you go to move it, it just becomes slightly heavier, but it may still move. So you might be pulling on it and your line's moving and you're like, feels like maybe you have a branch that's just slowly coming in with it. But then if you hold it long enough or you keep pulling it long enough, you'll feel it go boom, boom, boom. But then too late, you set the hook and it's gone. That's because that fish came up, you're moving your bait along. They just sucked it in so slow and so easy. Now, when you pull them and you pull the bait, the fish doesn't let the bait go, and the fish doesn't necessarily pull back right away. The fish just kind of comes in with you a little bit. And then when the fish realizes and feels the thing in its mouth being pulled, that's when the fish gives you that tug and then spits it out, and then you set and miss it. So you have to be a pressure bite. You have to be aware of the weight change right now. That's kind of how they're biting. Now, some of them are just do 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 boing. Oh, hey, But all right, now let's try to break down Don Pedro for you a little bit. So if we were fishing Pedro, I'm going to show you guys a couple of the spots that I would fish right now. If I go to Pedro, where would I be and what would I be throwing? Well, right now, unless the weather turned bad and it was real windy and overcast, I would be throwing like a jerk bait and a spinner bait. If it gets windy and a little overcast, I would slow roll a spinner bait and use really long pauses on like a 110 plus, one suspending jerk bait, mega bass. You get it, 6 to 8 feet, get it down 8 feet deep. And those bass are 8 to 10, 12 feet deep. And that lure jerks around and then sits there. Those bass are active still. The water temperature at McClure is 63. There was also another thing I want to talk about. You can look it up. You can Google it. A lot of anglers are either for or against this idea, but a lot of professional anglers, and in my 2 cents, it seems to make sense, is called a false spawn. So right now, the water temperature is 63. The hours of light in a day match exactly with spring, and the temperature outside and in the water 63. So the light matches up the time of day, the water temperature, and especially you get the moon phase, if it lines up, you'll get fish that will actually come up and stay shallow for a good 3 or 4 weeks or 2 or 3 weeks. and they'll be up there eating crawdads. They'll move up and down a bit, but they'll be up there shallow, like they're not quite sure why, like their body's pushing them to spawn, but there's no eggs. They won't spawn again. And they'll even pair up sometimes. You'll see two here, two there. You'll notice that you seem to catch two fish in a spot in a given few feet, and then nothing for a while. Then you move down, and then another two, right? So, and then, like I said, I've noticed there's a lot of fish right now in 1 to 10, 15 feet of water, even down to about 20, which is perfect spawning range for even spotted bass. So anywhere in that range is where they would normally go to spawn, right? And usually you'd think in 3 to 5, but trust me, lake levels will rise, so they'll go up, they'll make a bed in 3 to 5 feet. Lake level raises 10 feet, they're still down there bedding. They're bedding in 12 or 13 feet. Then you have another wave that comes up, spawns in 3 to 5 or whatever, 2 to 3, and so you'll have them staggered in layers. Now, obviously, they won't stay on a bed if it's in 40 feet of water. At least I'm not aware of anything like that happening, but I don't know how we would prove otherwise. But anyways, back to what I was saying is that it seems like there's a false spawn in the fall when the temperature and weather and everything line up correctly. You get this window where just a lot of fish are up shallow, and then you'll have in the same flip, you'll have a lot of fish that are down deep. And you're like, why are there two just big separated schools of bass right now? Like, shouldn't they should mostly be all schooling up? You'll find big schools in backs of creeks that'll push bait fish. You'll start to be able to spoon fish, and you'll see big schools that you can drop LV 500s, jigging spoons, flutter spoons, whatever, right? But why are they like that? I mean, that's kind of my 2 cents on it. So, anyways, I think that shallow fishing pay off for probably the next few weeks. But then as the weather just stays cold and gets colder and colder and colder, and that water temp drops, them fish are going to pull out the shallows. And all times in the year, even in the middle of January, February, and in late December, there's still going to be bass in 2 to 3 feet of the water. Sometimes it's just the majority of them will pull out, and they'll be deeper. So especially in the winter, that's why you got to have a fizzer on board. I did a video on how to fizz a fish, so you guys will get to see that coming out soon. I did one already in the past, so if you want to check that out, you can see that. So I do one where I fizz them through the side. I've done them where I fizz them through the mouth. So kind of showing you a couple different ways, whatever you're comfortable with, a couple of ways to fizz them. Because it's going to be deep fishing soon. I think we've got another 2-3 months at least. Or I'm sorry, 2-3 weeks of shallow jig fishing until the weather stays cold long enough, and with water temps drop into their 50s, then we should start seeing some change. And I think jig fishing will still work. I think the fish will just pull down a bit more, right? So, but as the water temp gets colder and colder, that's when I look forward to either float and fly if I have to, but also a blade bait, jerk bait. I'm looking forward to throwing some nice baits, send some big swim baits for the big bass, HUDs, dragon swim baits and stuff like that. So a lot of fun. But let's get to Pedro real quick. You guys had some questions about Pedro. Let's look at the comments real fast. Parallel in the bank by casting about 20 feet. Yeah, usually. It depends. I like the Pedro. Yeah, micro guides help, but yeah, you can don't put your hooks in them. Oh yeah. Hey, 209, how's it going? All right, guys. Yeah, so I'll break down Don Pedro for you as best I can, and we'll show you guys. We'll do a kind of ghetto representation of it. I'm probably not going to nail it right. Uh, we'll just call this Fleming Bay area. And then I think I drew it way too big. We'll talk South Lake real quick, and then we'll go into. It goes like that. Let's go back over here. Rogers Creek and the 2 Points Boneyard out here. So we'll do the mid lake. Let's see here. So this is Lower Lake. Let's just say it's kind of not the best representation, but Fleming, let's say, is down in here, and you've got, depending on the lake level, usually you'll have some long arms that come out, right? There's some big, I don't think it does this, it's more like this. There's some big rock right here, and then there's a marina right here that has all the houseboats, right? And then there's a lot of nice big rock right here. Oh, sorry, no, this isn't Big Rock. This is a point that goes like this. And the point is actually really good right in this area, like this. Too much in here, you can get them in there sometimes, but I destroy it. There's a particular ridge line that comes down like this with some big boulders. There'll be some nice bass that'll be down here. Sometimes they're deeper, sometimes they're right up against the water. But those fish will start biting on sometimes even as far on this back side of this point. But this whole point will be good wrapping in here. This rock wall right here is excellent. It's a steep, big boulder rock wall. Now there's usually houseboats out off of this point. It's not that long. Maybe it's like this right here. But the point underwater, though, goes really far. This right here is one of my favorite spots to fish offshore with drop shots, Ned rigs, jigs. There'll be a rock pile way off from this, almost 100 yards or so, where it'll go down, and then it'll go down to maybe 60 and then come back up to about 45 feet. There's a killer rock pile. And then out here, actually in Blue Oaks, this thing goes out. Let's say the launch is up here. There's an arm that comes out really good. I've done really good in the dam. And here I've done all good along the rocks, doing crankbaits, jerk baits, spinner baits in the rocks, or even not jigs, sorry, drop shots with very light weights. It's easy to get snagged in there, but there's a lot of fish that hang in the rocks on the dam. But on the side here in this little cove, I've done good. But basically my honey holes would be right here. This is one of them, right here on this rock pile, or right here on the point. That would be one of them. Blue Oaks go round the corner. There's some islands out over here, and basically I go up in here. There's a couple of shelves that come down with some really big rock, and it's isolated where it's like plain rock. And there's actually a couple of these cuts here in Blue Oaks and Mexican Gulch, actually. So it should look like there should be more of that here. There's a lot of fish that can be in this area. Blue Oaks, let's just say the launch is like right here. Sorry, right here. And you come around the corner, you know, and then there's this arm, and then there's a bunch of others, and the houseboats are all here in the middle, right? Then there's a big rocky, well, no, this is, let's say, the main long point. This actually can be good with drop shots in the wintertime right now, fishing real far offshore, fishing in anything from 20 to 60 feet deep, and using Ned rigs and drop shots. Fish come in and out of the lake, of the South Lake, using this arm a lot. Now there'll be a big rock wall right here that's almost directly across from, well, actually it would be like this. So this map's all screwed up, but it's almost directly across from Fleming Meadows. Big boulders. There's the floating bathroom that's usually right there. That's a great wall to throw jigs on. And then when you go around in there where there's those houseboats at, there's a couple of walls in here that have some big rock that are isolated that's by itself. I'll go hit those up. I have some really good spots that are down here in the South Lake by the dam. Now, I can shoot into Rogers, and back here and here, there's a couple of islands. So depending on the water level, I like to fish some islands here. There's a couple out in the middle in Rogers. So I'll fish these islands right here. In this bay in the back, depending on water level, there's actually a lot of wood back here that you can use to use jigs to hit them if they're in the wood. And then back here, there's a ton of wood. So depending on what you're trying to target. Now, out of here, there's been 2 fish over one in 12 and a half, and the other one was like 11 caught out of here by my buddy in the back. Now, going this way, this would be Big Creek, right? So I like to go into the back of Big Creek and fish. The left one is okay. It can be steep, so I'll fish the entrance sometimes. The right side goes back and goes further. I like fishing the right side. So I fish Big Creek, you know, fish in the back past the 5. Just shoot past the 5. Right before the 5, there's a couple of okay spots. There's a couple of islands that are going to be like right here, depending on water level. But I usually shoot past the 5. Now, right in here is the entrance to 49er Bay. And all along here is a really good rock wall that is like volcanic rock type stuff. And it's got a lot of fish that'll sit up on that. Now, the boneyard that you're talking about, you know, you come in and the boneyard's back in here where there's like the sandstones, and then it's real shallow. It wraps around in the back and it goes back this way. That's the boneyard. Boneyard's good for deep fishing in the winter sometimes for some spots. There's smallmouth that'll be there. But I have more favorable spots. I prefer to stay in the South Lake a lot. Unless I'm on a specific bite, you know, I'll go look around, and I get into bites in Hatch Creek a lot. Good hot bites in Hatch Creek. I've got some really nice ones in Moccasin. Woods Creek, I've had some fun in. Woods Creek's kicked out some good numbers. Rogers Creek has been okay, but I've usually done better in Big Creek than Rogers Creek. So looking at the lake, I usually do a lot better in Big Creek than Rogers. So let's just say you're coming in. The boneyard is, let's just say the boneyard is right here, and there's like a long point that goes out, and then it wraps around. Then it goes back into like a bay like this, and then there's some cuts. And then over here, there's the point. There's you got Jenkins Point around here, and then you got the point there where Big Creek comes in, and then you've got Mid Lake right here, right, where you've got is about to come around the corner. You go around the corner here, turns around the corner, and then if you get back in here enough, I think Hatch Creek would be, you got one that goes this way, and then one that goes back this way. This one is Hatch Creek. All right. And then there's some kind of cuts that are out here on this side that are run good. And then you have the power lines, right? And it kind of goes like this, and you have an island, a big island, I think, right here, and then a couple out here. And then it goes past, right? So this, speaking of this area of the lake, float and fly along the steep rock wall on this turn right here has been really good. Float and fly right there. Boneyard has been good. Off that boneyard, that long point that goes out real shallow, we're like halfway in the lake. It's only like 20 feet deep down there, right off this real long point. Oh, and boneyard, I've got a lot of nice bass, smallmouth and spotted bass fishing off that. During spawn time, I've done good over here, but not really been one of my favorite spots over there most of the time. Kind of avoid that unless it's spawn. There's some cuts in the back here. I think there's one that goes this way that I've got fish in as well, and done pretty well once you go around. There's also, I've caught a few off of this point. There's a cove that goes in here like this behind Boneyard. I've done okay in there. I've done good here. When you go into this area here, I've done really good in all of Hatch Creek. I've done okay on this point going into here, but this wall has never really treated me good. In here, I've caught, I've found schools of monster bass in there before, and they're pinned in there for months. And when I say monsters, like 4 to 5s, 3s, and 4s, just beautiful, just heaven. You know, this was long time ago, but I found them in these two cuts up here. I tear them up around these islands that you find. These aren't to scale, by the way. And then going towards the power pole, there's also that area that has the cement, like from Exchequer Dam or whatever the other dam, Hetch Hetchy or whatever, and then underwater it runs across to the other side, and then you see all the pipes going up the mountain. Well, that big cement thing, jerk baiting, crank baiting, and jigging along the side of it, drop shotting around it. There's a lot of fish that'll hold in these two kind of areas right here, right? So this is my mid lake breakdown. That's kind of where I like to fish, in the mid lake area. Now we're going to start from telephone poles, and then we'll head over by the boat campground and the little retention wall back there, and then we'll get into the Narrows and Moccasin and Woods. So I should be able to fit all that here, I think. So coming from here, we have, let's say, that's the cement pipes that go across, right? And the lakes right here. Then you have, it goes down further, and then it cuts into, like, I think a little two kind of creeks like this, and there's it's like LDP, like campground where you can park your boats, and then there's like a bathroom I think up there, but there's no road or no way to get to it. It's only for boats in the summertime and stuff like that. So it's a little known like camp spot. I don't know if the bathroom's still there, a picnic table up there and everything, and it's super remote, so barely anyone knows about it. And in this cut right here, A-rig, all kinds of stuff. Same thing in here. And here it gets really deep in the middle, but in the wintertime, I've killed them all in here where that little campground's at, right? And then I think it goes like this, and then there's the point that goes like this, right? And then there's the false, like it's not the way to go, right? And you got to go the other way. And the Narrows, I'm going to have them all screwed up, so I'm going to draw it just kind of mini, right? So there's a couple of cuts on the Narrows, right? And then you got the bridge, and then you got Moccasin, where it goes back in like this, and it goes Moccasin Creek. I think there's another one in there right here. And then there's like a point right here. There's a few other points. There's points everywhere. Shoot. And then this goes into, excuse me, guys. This goes into Woods. Let's just wrap it around, whatever. Now, in the back here in Woods, there's an old launch. There's I think it's 120 or one of the highways, right? That goes, yeah, I think it's 120, the one that goes over the bridge, right? Then you can go off somewhere right here and drive down a road and park up here. And there's a launch where you can launch like kayaks and stuff. You can't launch a boat there. It's all deteriorated. And that's, let's just say that's right about here. Well, there's some islands, right, in woods. I don't know. I don't remember where they're at. They're good. I think there's 2 or 3 of them. So you want to fish those islands. By this launch, I've done good in this whole entire shoreline back here in woods. Same thing here. And as far back, I've tore them up, both shorelines, all of this. The islands I've done good on. Now, the main point here I've done good on. There's a couple of points going into moccasin that they kind of come out, in, out, in, out, in, right? They're just really good to fish. This main big one right here is also good to fish. There'll usually be a bunch of houseboats out here, and there's almost like a sandbar right here behind them, and then it goes deeper on one side. So back in here, depending on water level, can be good. And there's like an island, I think, right here. The launch is, let's just say it's somewhere back in here. And I fish all in here, and I've done pretty good on this side right here. The launch, you can throw swim baits parallel to the dock, big old monster bass when they plant trout right there. And I've caught them all up in here as far as you can get and go. I've done pretty good in there. Now in the narrows, I've caught them, and there's a couple of cuts. If you look on your map, I think 2 on the right or maybe 1 on the left. And I've caught them in all of them, but the 2 on the right are usually better than the 1 on the left. So I think right here, yeah, right here I've also done really good. I haven't done anything ever in this arm. I haven't really done any good here. And then most of the narrows, I haven't done really anything in other than these offshoots. So this is a good spot that I like to fish. This is a good spot. All of this I like to fish here. There's a couple islands, right? So you guys, I'm looking at main lake points usually. I'm looking for what separates some from others. I'm looking for channel swings, all kinds of stuff, you know, and there's just so much of it to fish. So where would I fish right now? If you dumped me at Lake Don Pedro and said, go fish, I'm going to my go-to spots, which is South Lake Don Pedro, because that's where I fish from shore, from Blue Oaks and Fleming Meadows. And I know every square inch of it. And I know that there's so many tournaments that are held out of Don Pedro. And here's a cool study. They did a study. You can look it up. Bass Pros, Bass, not Bass Pro Shop, but the Bass tournament, BASS, did a study. I think I was reading it in one of their little magazines, and they tagged all these fish that were caught during a tournament over the course of like a year, and they won it. And then they also did the same study on 10 pounders, and they're two different kind of results. 10 pounders did different things, but they still had similar results. But in the tournament caught fish, whether big or small, the ones that were tagged, I think they did it for a year straight in a lake in Texas. They found the majority of the fish hung out within 100 yards of wherever they were released for months, literally for a long time, or weeks or months. It was forever. And then they would move real slow. They would immediately go to the nearest cover. They would relax for a day or two. Then they'd start feeding, and then they'd stay, and they just stay hunkered down. And that was their new home, that area of the lake. And they just would feed and forage there before, and it could be months sometimes before the fish would actually cross giant swaths of the lake. Well, some of them would obviously do it quicker than others. The unique thing is that wherever they drop the fish off, there's going to be fish near there. So I'd go to Fleming Meadows, Blue Oaks, and be happy as hell dragging a jig all around every little rock and crack and crevice that I know there, because that's my personal fallback. Now, if I had to take a risk, take a chance, right, I would be checking in Hatch Creek. The fish, you got to understand, in the winter, they're going to be going to main lake points a lot of the time, right? While in the fall transition, they're going to be pushing bait fish into coves and cuts and areas that they can feed on them until winter and until they've got to pull off. And they've already been doing this for a while, right? Fish are active. you know, especially the last few weeks. I haven't been out on the lake for a while, but I assume that it's probably slowing down according to, like, you know, spinner bait bites and crankbait bites and active bites. Fish are just slowly, you know, water's getting cooler and cooler. So that would be my take. Because, anyways, my last week and a half out on the water and 5 trips has been a really hot jig bite, just fishing really slow, taking my time, not fishing too fast. And, you know, it's really paid off. So if I had to take some chances, what I would do is I would hit every rock pile that stands out on that lake with jigs. That's all I would be doing, is I would be fishing everything that's different. So when I look and there's a shoreline and it's all shale rock, and then boom, there's like a clumping of rocks right there, and you know half of them are in the water, or you see a giant, you know, coming down the mountain, there's just a bunch of boulders and rocks and it goes into the water, right? I'm driving straight there, and I'm fishing where the shale or whatever meets the big boulders, fishing all the big boulders and rock, and then to where it meets the next plain or unassuming shore. And then I'm picking up and I'm going to the next. And I'm fishing every key piece of structure, and I'm not going to doodle and whistle and be happy and enjoy life and smell the roses and drag jigs down shoreline. Even if it's in between two places, I'm hitting them specific, moving. And then I'm fishing slow though. So when I go to a spot, I'm not fish go like a, you know, Bass Pro or trying to run and gun. No. I mean, take run and gun and make it as if a snail could run and gun. Where what you do is you're snail fishing and you're thoroughly clear, just fishing all this area that's key, perfect area. Whether it's 10 feet or whether it's a 100-foot shoreline, but I'm going to fish it really thorough, especially if I know that's the pattern. Then once I'm done, I'm pulling up and I'm off to the next spot that's like that. And basically, my pattern for me has been anything that's structural. Now, if there's a million trees, it has to also stand out. So you go to a shoreline and there's some shale, there's some dirt, there's some mud, and then there's some boulders. Where are the fish going to want to be? Now, if the whole shoreline is boulders, what tells you where the hell the fish are going to be? It's all boulders. You got to pick a spot, right? They might be at the longest point, the shortest point, the deepest, the whatever. You got to kind of pattern and figure them out if they're there, right? But if you have some shoreline that's got a rock here, boulder there, a stump here, some shale or some dirt, and then there's just this clumping of boulders and rocks, that's where you want to be. Fish that, move on to the next one. Fish that, move on to the next one. Fish is slow, take your time. That's what I would do, you know. So I would be in places like probably 49er Bay. I would go check in. The Boneyard would probably get checked in. Like I said, there's some rock walls down in Fleming Meadow area that's across from the launch over by the boat, the houseboats that I'd be jigging. There's a rock wall down by the dam. Well, by those, by that, the houseboats that are in that Marina Cove little area, there's a giant rock wall right there. I'd be jigging that. I usually have to go check into the dam, but I mean, that's obviously what a lot of guys are going to do late tournament. So they're going to go run and gun. They're going to go upriver. They're going to go moccasin. They're going to go, you know, the Pillars 120. They're going to go, you know, Big Creek, Rogers. You're going to have guys shooting out, going everywhere. And then as the day gets by, they pull back and then they fish in that little area and they hit the best spots, right? And they try to clean up, maybe pick up a fish here or there. They're looking for something to improve the bag, and they just, you know, need to get back into the weigh-in range. They have an hour or two. That's how most guys will do it. I sometimes will fish while nobody's in South Lake, so I'm not getting bothered, and I'm not having to fish behind a bunch of people. I'll pick off all the best spots there and then have a little bit of time, and I'll pick 1 or 2 spots and I'll run. You know, I'll go to 49er Bay and then Big Creek, and if I didn't do good, I didn't do good. Maybe they're all in Rogers. That was the, you know, my gamble, right? So that's kind of how I would look at it. So I would be in Hatch Creek area looking in. I would be in 49er Bay, that point where it's all rocky, looking and checking in there. I'd have a brush hog or a brush jig tied on, you know, for wood. And I would be down in Big Creek probably checking in. And I would favor fishing time over running and gunning. So unless I know that there's a hot bite up in Moccasin, those are where the trout eater bigger fish might be, up in Moccasin, up in that area. You can float and fly for some really big spotted bass in the Narrows and in a couple areas up there. Float and fly is going to start really killing it, but it's not cold enough yet. I don't think the water temperature's there. So I'd probably, in my personal opinion, be sticking with something like a jig covering rocks and boulders and main lake points too, still, because even though it's not that 100% pattern yet, it's not winter, that's always a good place to pick some bass off. So that's my breakdown of Pedro, guys. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Thanks for joining, Lucas Edward. I can't talk right now. What the hell? Let's read some comments. Let's chit chat. If you guys have anything to add, kind of went off on a tangent, broke Lake Don Pedro down as quick as I could for you guys. I know it's kind of all over the place, but I've got 25 years of fishing experience on Pedro and McClure, and I know that those places pretty good. And so it can be like being in a store with 1,000 toys and you're a little kid and you have to choose one, right? And it's like, I have so many fond memories. So there's so many memories of big fish here, big fish there, losing big fish here and there. So I know where I've had them in the past, where my friends have caught them, where other people have caught them. So it's there's so much to choose from. It's such a big lake. It's a wonderful lake. I love that lake. So and it can humble you, it can kick your butt, and big brutal waves. Man, Pedro is a mother of a lake. It's an awesome lake though, for sure. Hey, Larmy, nice to see you on tonight. What's your favorite areas to drop shot there? Oh, it's got to be that point, South Lake down by the dam. So the point that's, if I had to draw it real quick here, my favorite place that I've ever been at Don Pedro to drop shot, and it's probably my favorite in Don Pedro period for fish. I don't always, but like 90% of the time, I can catch, a limit or at least half of a limit of solid good fish. So say the dam is down here and there's like the Blue Oaks is kind of the launch of Blue Oaks is right here, right? And then the dam's right here, and it goes this way, and it goes in like this, and then it goes like this, and then it goes in like this, and then there's the pump house is usually right here with the big thing that rolls down the mountain, right? So this very first point, it actually extends out into the lake super far, and there's a rock pile on it, and then it drops off. It drops off on each side real, and it's full of rocks and full of structure. And I'll circle this thing, and then I'll fish out here and out here, and I'll sit here and bring my lure up, get snagged all the time, and then I'll bring it, past this rock pile, sometimes over it. You get snagged and lose a lot, but God, that freaking point is loaded like 90% of the time. Summer, spring, fall, winter, I don't give a shit. That point and that whole area right there where that pump house is at, there's a lot of rock and structure there. That place is always good for a solid, decent limit, basically. Maybe not going to win you a tournament, but sometimes I've caught 5-pounders out of that while everyone else is struggling. And there's a tournament winning spot right there for sure. But that's probably my favorite spot to drop shot, hands down. Right, there is a very special rock pile that just nobody seems to know about, and I've told everybody. I always tell everybody. Sometimes I see people there, and I'm like, hey, hey, we watched the channel. Oh, cool, but no matter how much I seem to spout about that spot, you would think you'd see more boats on it, but I swear to God, man, I put it on everything. That's my favorite spot at Don Pedro. One of them. It's hard though, man. I've got so many. And that's not even where the biggest fish. The reason it's one of my favorite spots is it's got so many decent fish that came out of there over the years. I've always, when I've struggled, usually could go to that spot and grind out a couple keepers. It's just such a welcoming on a tough day to be able to go there and catch a couple when I got skunked or I'm only catching a few and I can go there and catch it. Or I know that like if I'm catching dinks all day, I can go there and catch a 2-3 pounder usually at least. There's just it's a good solid spot. So and I have so many more too. It's like damn, it's hard to choose. But that spot's sentimental value too. Like my buddy's dad who passed away, that was his favorite spot, and he took my buddy a lot when he was a kid, and then my buddy took me, and we've had a lot of good memories out there. So that particular point is just and we've caught a lot of big fish. So but that's it. Oh, you'd love to see a breakdown like this for McClure. So I'd have to say we'll do that on the next one for sure. Then tonight, I think we've got some enough time. We can chat. Let's answer questions. If you guys get a chance, smash the like button. Let me know how you guys think we did. We can talk about anything you guys want in the meantime. But I'll do a nice, good, solid breakdown of McClure for you guys Friday. So I know a lot of people have tournaments there this Saturday and Sunday. So I'll basically try to put as many of you guys on an even footing as I can because I know exactly where they're at, what they're biting. They're loaded in certain areas. Yeah, may the best fisherman win at that point because definitely there's a couple of key things to watch out for at McClure. Now, there are so many ways to catch fish. You can catch them on spinner bait. You can catch them on the jerk bait. You can catch them on dang near everything. But you know, a jig right now in the rocks has been the pattern at McClure, and I could definitely show you guys where. Sorry, I got a buddy texting. I want to see if we're still fishing. Am I still fishing? All right. I might be going fishing Friday and we'll do another video for you guys. But yeah, so I'll break down McClure for you guys before the weekend so you guys have a nice breakdown of that because McClure is one of my favorite. Now, how many double digits? Okay, so let's see. How many double digits do you have under my belt now? I've got 4 double digits under my belt. And truth be told, I've probably lost like 10 to 15 easy, if not more. It sucks. I've got so much experience losing double digit fish. Like I guarantee you, like, oh my God. And plenty that were probably not double digits, 8 and 9. Um, Frustrating. So I've learned a lot from those. I'm glad I have the 4. Some, just it's crazy. My friends laugh at me, and a couple of them, they're like, how many opportunities I've had to get a double digit is insane. But in my defense, most of my double digits that I've lost were in like the first probably 10 years of my fishing. I had so many opportunities, so many of them hooked that it was just the most frustrating thing to lose them, to snap in my line. I've had them spool me. I've had one spool me. I'm sitting there crying. Nothing I could do. I tried to tighten the drag and it damn near snapped the line almost. And I'm running like 10-pound test and I'm trying to stop it and it's just not stopping and it's going and going. And I'm just I have to have the drag at just this perfect level. And I'm thinking, I almost wanted to swim into the lake and start chasing this thing. It just kept going and going and going and going. Sure enough, it spooled me. I've had one spool me. It's nuts. Did it at McClure too, by the way. I've had them do all kinds of shoot. I've lost them. Yeah, so I've got 4 double digits under my belt, but I've got a lot more that I've lost, unfortunately. Just went there with my buddy who was pre-fishing for Christian Bass League. I was trying to hit you up prior on Messenger. Caught all my fish on a white chartreuse 3/4 ounce spinner bait. Nice. Yeah, spinner bait has been catching them. I saw Ryan Cook at the lake. He was telling me spinner bait's been working too. But jig's just been on fire. Basically, slow rolling a spinner bait right now. If you're spinner bait fishing, you don't want to be running it too high in the water column. you want to run them real slow, and then run them parallel. So and probably anywhere from 2 3 feet of water down to about 15, maybe 20 max, and slow roll your spinner bait. They're getting crushed. I've got a spinner bait tied on right now. So these are my 4 rods that I'm using. So you guys can see if there's any water coming in the back of a creek, if I'm fishing after rain, during rain, I'm using a darker color. I'm using a Nico rig. There's a rattle in the tail, and this is 8 pound test, I believe. So that is one of my setups. Second setup here is 15, I believe, or 12 pound test fluoro with a double blade Booyah spinnerbait, white and chartreuse, 1/2 ounce, I believe, with a 2.5 inch Kitech trailer on there. And then for when the going was really tough or I was targeting a specific spot, Margarita Mutilator, extremely important color for McClure. If you're going to fish McClure, you better have this. If you're going to drop shot, this one will outfish them all there. Mark my words, and there's a lot of people that'll attest to that. Man, people feel, everybody's got their own. So, teach their own. If you got something that works better and different for you, that's great. I'm not saying like it has to be this way, but that's just what I always have. And then the jig here. And this one is a 1/2 ounce jig, green and brown color with a green and purple trailer, and there's purple flakes in it. So those have been my 4 rods that I've been using. 3 spinning and 1 bait caster because I've been so dialed in. And the reason I've been using this spinning rod right here over anything is this is basically a all-in-one spinning rod. I believe it's actually got 15 pound test. It's medium heavy, 7'2", I want to say. Let me see, is this the 7'2"? And it's got a big spool so it can hold a lot of line. Fast action. It's the 7 foot, and it's medium. Sorry, but the way that this, that's not a medium heavy, it's a medium. But the way that this one works for me with this is it's the perfect lure or perfect setup for using in the rain and in the wind. So with this right here, I can throw a crankbait, I can throw a spinner bait, I can throw any lure directly into almost gale force wind, rain, anything. And I can fish jigs. I can fish Texas rig. I can fish even a drop shot or a Ned rig with this baby. Fluorocarbon line. It's some really good stuff. I think this might actually be 14, not 15. It's pretty thin, but I know it's not 12. I want to say this is 14. This one's got 15 on it. My jig rod, the white rod there. So this one right here has been a really this spinning rod here has been a really key setup for my arsenal. Is I'm using it not really for finesse at all. For finesse, I've got this medium light stuff, real flimsy 6 foot something stuff. That's and this rod right here, by the way, has 2 double digits on it, and it was $60 for the rod and reel, and it's the Jimmy Houston Hog Hunter from Walmart. And this damn bastard has been like my most solid pole that I've ever had. I catch almost every fish I ever hook on it. And like I said, I've got 2 double digits on it, and it's the cheapest Walmart gear you could think of, but it works so good. And I've got like a really nice $100 and something Daiwa reel on it. So anyways, that's what I'm using right there. That's my setup. That's what I'm taking with me on boats. And basically I'm fishing with just some bags because everybody, I assume, knows my boat's broke down and it's in the shop. The part's on back order, right? So what I've been doing is in order to make fishing easier, I just got all my junk in bags. Now it's mostly plastics, right? I just got tons of plastics, rubbers, and Senkos and Ned rigs and things, right? And then I've got on my terminal right here, So and then that's full of jigs. Then I've got rattle traps, jerk baits, crank baits, deep diving, medium, shallow. I've got everything I might need for those active fish right there. And then in my other bag, I've also got some spinner baits and some things like that. So I'm like a hobo fisherman right now. So in my boat, I've got everything, right? I've got all kinds of crap. But right now, being that I'm like the hobo fisherman and I'm fishing out of the back of everyone's boat, I'm basically just bringing like my go-tos and I'm just going with it. So I would prefer to have two bait casters and then the three spinning rods. And so what happened with my other bait caster is the line needs to be redone on the spool. I lost like half a spool of line. So I need to redo that one. Otherwise, it's basically sitting by ready to go. But yeah, so that's what I'm fishing with: four rods, three spinning, and one bait. Because basically, that bait caster that I have is a medium heavy 7'6" carbon light, and I use it to throw jigs. I use it to throw jerk baits. I use it to throw LV 500s. Basically, any power fishing lure, I use that. Now, if I'm going to throw a crankbait, I do have like a $600 crankbait setup, or like a 2.5 to almost $300 rod with a nice reel. But I usually, that's like for a certain crankbaits, and I only use it in certain conditions. Plus, I don't want to take that out and get it beat up. I would actually probably respool this exact setup here. It's got 8-pound test on it. I would respool this with probably some 12, and then I would use this right here for my crankbait if I had to. But without respooling, see, I can just switch to this one. So this is a medium 7 foot, and I can throw like a spinner bait. I can throw all kinds of stuff on it. So in the heat of the battle, if I want to throw like a square bill or a medium diving crankbait, voila, this is perfect. Do I want to throw a deep diving crankbait? Then bam, I just pull this out. Now, I do have to retie constantly, but again, I'm in the back of someone's boat. I can't show up with like 8 poles and like 7 tackle boxes, right? I know some guys do, but I think it's super disrespectful to like go fishing with somebody and bring all that crap. Like, if you know what you're doing, you don't need to bring all that crap. Like, limit yourself, you know? You got guys that'll show up with like and don't get me wrong, I got guys that do this with me, and I don't think it's disrespectful to me to do it. I just, for me, I don't like taking up the space in your boat. And then it's just also, when you get dialed into a place, you kind of know, you want to have some things to try, you know. But for example, I'm not really throwing top water much. They're still hitting it, but it's just going to get worse and worse and worse. And it's like, I'm not really caring about top water right now. So I'm not going to have the top water rod. I'm not going to have a frog rod with braid on it. I'm not going to have a punching rod with braid on it, right? I'm not going to have any of that crap. I'm going to have fairy wands for drop shotting and Ned rigging and stuff like that. And then I'm going to have like my all purpose, so I can throw some light jigs, some Texas rig, the crankbait, spinner baits, whatever I want, even a jerk bait or something on that. But then if I really want to get down and dirty and have some power, that's what this guy's for. So it's just a perfect little setup. Doesn't take a ton of money. I'm not taking a couple $1,000s out. Well, actually, I probably am, but I'm not, taking all that expensive gear with me to go fish in the back of someone's boat. Could step on it, break it. It's not my boat, right? So it's the perfect little setup to take with me to go fish in the back of someone's boat. But anyways, hope you guys enjoyed tonight's video. Let's get back into the conversation here, and we'll be getting off here in a minute. I keep getting carp on spoons. There's a lot of carp in McClure I've seen right now too. They're shallow. They're kind of moving around. So if you're seeing big schools and you're, hey, love you, buddy. Oh, nice. Yeah, that's a good swim bait spot. That point right there is awesome. Appreciate it, Lucas. Thank you very much. Do. Slow down. Nothing big though, huh? Yeah. Do you have a preference on trailers versus no trailers on spinner baits? Usually I like to throw a trailer on a spinner bait, but I don't like the trailer to be too big. Rule of thumb for me with the spinner bait is whenever I use a trailer, we're going to use a jig for an example, right? A spinner bait has a skirt as well. So I don't want my trailer sticking too far past the skirt. And my rule of thumb is especially past the hook, nothing that sticks out more than maybe an inch and a half, because I don't want so much excess that I get a short strikes. So you can use a stinger hook, but I don't use stinger hooks. I just, usually have a small little trailer. Now, if I'm using a double bladed Colorado, sometimes I don't use a trailer. If I go, another thing is if you go with a heavy enough spinner bait, in the wind or depending on the circumstance, you don't have to use a trailer to get the buoyancy and lift, or to even get that size, because those blades and that skirt poofs up, just looks so big in the water. You don't have to. So my preferences are I usually use a trailer, but I go without a trailer a lot and stroke them. And so I've caught so many big bass on spinner baits without trailers. That's more of a new thing. But I used to be called spinnerbait Sam. My friends used to make fun of me because I would spinnerbait more often than not, because we all fish from shore. And I just got sick of getting snags. Well, they're all Texas rigging or jig fishing, and they're getting snagged and loot going through $100 worth of tackle, but catching fish. I'm throwing a spinnerbait, and what would happen is they might outfish me half the time. But sometimes I catch a few, they catch a few. Hey, big deal. But a lot of times, like the other half of the time, I'm the only one catching fish, or I'm catching big ones and they're catching little ones and getting big, aggressive fish hitting that spinnerbait. And I tell you that I used to, back in the days, fish it consistently without a trailer. Now, whenever one of my tricks was, though, whenever the rubber band broke and the skirt fell off, then I would put a big rubber worm or a curly tail rubber worm on there, and I would just use that, and I would catch fish reeling in a spinnerbait with no skirt, with just the blades and then a rubber on it, and I would jig it. I would use it as a jig, so it's kind of like the very first chatterbait, I guess you would say, when they didn't exist in the '90s. If I wanted to get my spinnerbait down, I would just simply cast my spinnerbait out, let it sink, and then jig it up, and then reel. And then sometimes you'd feel your spinnerbait kind of tangled in the line. I was good at popping it out, and then just once you felt the right action in the blades, jig, and I'd reuse my spinnerbait like how a lot of people would use a chatterbait, if you bottom bounce it basically. So I love a spinnerbait. You heard there's another secret color at McClure. Do you have a preference on for me, secret color at McClure is Margarita Mutilator. If you're talking about Robo Worm, it is the go-to. Nobody, I mean, everybody's been throwing it now, so it might have changed over the years. But also a what do you call it? Like almost a see-through clearish yellow, like this right here. I'll show you. I use baby brush hog out there, and the color like this kills it a lot. So we merculate them on that. But usually it's a Margarita Mutilator for the win. You like the MM2 for the drop shot, or 3 for the drop shots. What's the spinner bait weight? Half ounce is usually what I use. Yeah. What's the best cranking color for Pedro? Two different ones in my opinion. I like sexy shad, or any kind of like shad, but a sexy shad pattern, Strike King, silver, or sorry, white, with a little tiny bit of chartreuse and blue in it. If I remember correctly. Hey, Mark Nav, how's it going, brother? So I would be using like a sexy shad or a crawl red. I've got a cold blooded river to sea deep diving crankbait. I got a double digit on. It's this guy right here. but this version. So River to Sea makes some great crankbaits. Here's one I've been throwing a lot lately. Here's two of them. So we got this one in like a traditional shad pattern. So this is an Ish Monroe. Let's see if you can read it. Probably not, but this is a River to Sea deep diver. These crankbaits kill it. And right now you can dig this into the bottom and go slow, and they're cracking them. I just didn't really want to tell anybody that quite yet, but I'll tell you guys. We're talking about jigs tonight, but something you might not see me throw on your boat, but I throw it when I'm by myself. I talk about the square bills a lot. Well, River to Sea makes also a deep diver too, and this is one of my favorites. So deep diving crankbaits, River to Sea, but color wise, it's this one right here. So it's this color and that type, and I actually have it. It's tied on in one of my poles in the boat right now, so I don't have it with me. But it's this crankbait right here, this exact crankbait in this color. That's the killer. Got a double digit on one, so you guys can see my Don Pedro video. I got a double digit fishing at night with Doug, and that fish came off of the River to Sea. So this is kind of like a sexy shad, almost a little bit of chartreuse on the bottom, like a silver, then like a blue top, right? That's not what this is, but a crankbait that's like this. I like a crankbait that's got a bit of a green on the bottom, silver, white side, and blue top like this. Strike King makes one called the Sexy Shad. So I use those colors a lot in the deeper diving crankbaits. So if I'm trying to mimic a shad, I'm going with that Sexy Shad. If I'm trying to mimic a crawdad, I go with this one. It's called Cold Blooded. So those are my two favorites right there. That's what I'd be busting out. So when I get out to the lake next, I think I've been on the jig bite too much. Like I know it'll work, but I want to see if I want to try to put together some footage of you guys with the jerk bait, a spinner bait, and maybe like a crankbait, and we'll do some different techniques. Show you guys how to use those real slow. How to use a jerk bait in, like, you want one that goes about 8 feet, and you can put your pole in the water and get it down real deep. And then once you've got it there, you just give it some little jerks and you let it sit, and you get little jerks. You want to get a suspending jerk bait. You don't want it to float to the surface. So there's a couple of tricks. We'll go over that. I'll do a breakdown of McClure on the next video. So Friday, we've got one more gift card we're going to give away here for November. So for our members giveaway, stick around, not tonight, but Friday. So I don't mean like that, but make sure you guys hit your notification bell. We're going to have a giveaway Friday. So you know how we do these Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So we'll do our November giveaway Friday. We're about to hit 2,000 subs on the channel here. Our Facebook page has over 50,000 people on it. The channel here is almost at 2,000. I've got almost 2,000 or a little more friends on Facebook that are fishing related. So growth is good. You know, it's slow and steady. So I appreciate everybody. So when we hit that 2,000 mark, which should be coming up around the corner anytime, probably just in time for Christmas, we'll be doing probably like a rod and reel giveaway. So make sure you guys stay tuned for that. But I hope you guys enjoyed tonight's video on jig fishing tips, kind of jump into a breakdown of Don Pedro. And I think we'll pick up next week, or sorry, not next week, but this Friday, on tactics like the spinner bait, jerk bait, crank bait, and how to use them this time of year to get those bass. And we'll hopefully have some footage for you guys coming out soon to match that. But and you know, some pictures and stuff, I'll upload that. So if you guys want to follow me on Facebook, Sam Matthews on Facebook, Sambo209 on Instagram, and you can find me, I think, Samuel Matthews 81 or something like that on Twitter. If you guys want to see me going crazy there, but yep. Thank you guys for watching. We'll see you guys on Friday, and we'll be having our November giveaway. My birthday is next week, so Thanksgiving's coming. My family is going to be here from out of town. I'll probably be doing some shortened live streams, so we'll still be doing them. Now, members, remember when I go on a fishing trip to new spots or places, or if a bite's changed, I'm going to put posts that'll be real time the second I'm leaving the lake. I'm going to put an update and let you guys know on what lures, on what depths, what locations. I'll literally break everything down as good as I can and post that for you guys as well. And those posts will never become public. They will always stay private for you guys, for the members. I'm going to start uploading some members only content as well that is never going to go public. We got some blooper reels coming. We got some funny stuff that you just couldn't make up. Just it's just great, catching us friends being funny. So that's going to stay members only. We're going to have some really cool, fun stuff coming up. So I appreciate everyone bearing with me. Though I know the last few months has been hectic without a boat, with me doing HVAC. So I appreciate everybody, being with me through those downtimes. So eventually, I think there's going to be a lot of great things coming to the channel. Like I said, I want to get guests here. We've got my little stand set up with the Jig Sucking Lips shirt, the whiteboard here, so I can bust out some more detailed kind of information when we're talking about lures. And then when I want to try to picturize something that I'm explaining, I've got a nice place I can do it at right here. Down the road, it would be really nice to have like a computer program that's like a doodle program, and then I could do split screen share talking to you, and I don't have to turn my back to anything. Also, I can bring in, when I get to that point, I'd like to be able to bring up Google Maps and actually zoom in on Google Earth and look at individual links and spots and break them down with you guys real time. So we're working on that. I'm just computerly illiterate when it comes to kind of that high of a technical level of things. And the channel isn't big enough to warrant hiring anybody to come in here and show me how to do that stuff yet. So when we get there, we'll get there. So I plan on doing a lot of cool stuff if we can get there. Smash that subscribe and like, and we'll catch you guys on Friday. Tight lines, and I hope everyone has a good night.